Greetings. Welcome to my channel. This is a video. I'll be talking a little bit about my background in computer science, a little bit of my history for some of the people that might be a little bit more interested in exactly how I came to where I am making videos about the Racket programming language on YouTube. And in between there, I'll be doing a little bit of work on some of the code I'm doing for the future project here. So basically, to start out with is that I started programming very young. Again, I did my first programming environment was on an Atari 400 that my parents got me way back when I was a very young kid, and got into basic programming and did that for a while, and then moved on to the my next computer after that was a 1040 ST, also from Atari, with the big old 68,000 Motorola processor on it, the GEM operating environment. And I did some more programming on what was called GFX Basic, which is a little bit closer to Visual Basic than the Basic of the 8-bit days. So I did that for quite some time, and actually would go to some computer conferences and things like that back in the day. So I did that until I started studying Pascal when I was in high school, and I went to a high school that had an AP computer science program. And not only that, but at the time, the college there, the University of Utah computer science program, had a summer school for high school students that were very interested in programming. And I did that for 2 years. The first thing that they did is that obviously they had the program for a lot of, basically they would recruit juniors for that program. And one of the things that they would do is that they'd bring a certain amount of people back from that class that were, showed some promise, and they used them as kind of a peer, not, I would say counselors, but peer teachers, basically, teaching assistants. So that the kids could relate to them, and but also they'd have a little bit more experience with the programming environment. So after that, so I was doing that, and doing the kind of wanting to do all the things as fast as possible. I was doing college part-time my junior and senior year of high school, doing math. I was initially going to be a dual major in mathematics and computer science. By the time I actually got into college at the University of Utah, I was actually much more interested in doing a double major in music and computer science. And for anybody that was in the know about either one of those fields, that is nigh impossible to do. And the reason being is that, of course, when I started computer science, the amount of lab work required in an actual lab, again, you had to go to a computer lab to do your work. Or in my case, occasionally I could break out the old computer and through dial-up, hook into one of the machines and try to do some programming there. So, but really we had to do a lot of projects in the lab because there's a lot of actually team projects that were done. So I was working on my degree there, decided not to do the music major because, as someone pointed out, it was more likely that computer science was going to be an easier career for me to have. And that's certainly true. And when looking back on it, I'm probably a better programmer than a musician. Even though I would have probably liked doing a lot of things about music more, I certainly, one of the best times I've had is, performing as a musician. The few times I've been able to do it. So the interesting thing about that was that I actually lucked out in a lot of ways, is that I had some very good teachers, and I came into the University of Utah at a very interesting time. I started out doing undergraduate research at in operating systems, of all things, there. And I transitioned from that my senior year after I took a software engineering class. That was one of the first times they had it. And it was one of the first times that they had actual Windows machines. And this was the days of Windows NT4. And the reason they put in Windows machines is that, as somebody noted, they went to a lot of industry people and said it's like there's increasingly more and more people that they just not only needed Unix programming experience, but they needed Windows programming experience. And that turned out to be pretty fortuitous. I'm one of the oddballs that actually started out on Linux and Unix and went to Windows and stayed. So, judge of me of what you will, what that means about my character. But I just found that over time and how my career went, that Windows worked out fine for me. And nowadays I can have all the Linux I want in Windows 11, thanks to the Windows subsystem for Linux, and I'm a very happy camper there. And before that, would install SigWin when I really needed all those those Unix tools. So I did that. So I pivoted to software engineering and worked on my master's. And part of that pivot was we were studying what would become eventually UML 1.0. And I became very interested in that, software modeling and design. So much so that I did my master's thesis on that, on how to basically an environment for doing code generation by basically coding up an add-in for rational rows to do some coding for a specific runtime target system at HP. So that's what I got my master's in. And after I got my master's, I was able to get a job at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory working on supercomputing and also some of the engineering stuff I was doing. Unfortunately, I got a little bit restless there. I didn't understand the advantages of a civil service job there. And the fact that if I had just been patient and waited it out, I could have had a very long and successful career. But this was also 1999. And for people that are familiar with the history of the whole first .com boom, that's when that was happening. So it was really tough because basically it's one of those things where it's like I was making okay money, but then the companies would come along and say, hey, you can code, and then we're going to give you more money. And so I went to BEA for a brief minute. Wasn't happy with doing the consulting work there and the travel. And then I got an opportunity to interview at HP. And that went pretty well. Unfortunately, one of the other companies I was looking at when I first was starting out and at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories and then was moving was Google. And I didn't see where Google was going or really understand what I could fit in there. So I went with HP instead. So, looking at that decision is like that flip of the coin went the wrong way. So I was at HP for quite some time. And one of the things I did there was one of the people that I worked with on my master's had worked on the UML 1.0 standard, and they had asked him to come back and work on the UML 2.0 standard. And he said, well, I'm not too interested, but there is someone that we just hired that would be very good. And so they said, okay, great, we'll have him. So I worked on the UML 2.0 standard. And if you look at the UML 2.1 documentation, my name is on it. I was one of the authors. So I went to a lot of standards meetings, did a lot of stuff. And yes, I probably understand UML better than most people do. Certainly, it's one of those things where there's not many of the experts on it, at any rate, fewer little of them now. But I have probably the deepest understanding of UML that you can ever get, having to come up with the second version of that standard. And, when initially we did that, we thought it was going to be, a very good long-term type of career. And a lot of people were very excited about what I was doing. But that all kind of collapsed after the .com thing. I wasn't able to do travel as much. And soon after the collapse and the merger of HP and Compaq, I was caught up in a big layoff at that company. Again, about 15,000 people combined from the two companies. And basically, I ended up back in the shores of academia, working on my PhD and just kind of doing part-time jobs here and there, teaching and trying to do other stuff. Tried to quit a couple of times, never managed to actually pull the trigger and just go back to working as a programmer. And over a long period of 7+ years, I was able to eventually get my PhD. And things were looking okay from there, but I was really struggling in I was doing a postdoc in medical informatics, and I was really struggling and I didn't know why. And that didn't go very well. I was not happy with my advisor. I didn't know how to go in and say, I don't think my advisor is very good. and didn't realize that since I was at the PhD level, that I was able to kind of do that in a kind of more politically sensitive way, saying, this is someone that is not really someone I'm clicking with. But also I was just not doing as much work. And certainly after that, I got a job with someone I knew, and I ended up struggling a lot. I was not very well. And for basically what it ends up, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and went back, moved to Oregon where I had family, spent a lot of time consulting off and on, doing various programming jobs and contracting gigs for 6 or 7 years, trying to maybe get my toes back into academics and see if I could come up and get anchored back in that environment. Never was able to. And then finally my health got to the point where I just can't work full time for various reasons. And so I spent a long time just doing other things with music and just adapting to what meant to be to no longer work full time and having to deal with the chronic illness and disability, which is really, really difficult. I have to say it's not fun in this current environment to, be basically having to, be on, Social Security disability and having long-term disability insurance. It's very, very difficult. And just recently I kind of realized I did miss some things about programming. And what had happened in the meantime was I was actually stunned at the amount of information and things that people were putting out on programming. I mean, there are people that are coders that are streaming on live and doing very well. And that, I just couldn't comprehend that. I could comprehend why you could build a large community about someone watching you code. For me, it was one of those things where it was always a very kind of solitary thing, or working with just one person if you're pair programming, or you weren't actually doing the things, you're interacting with other people. So the idea that it was a kind of a spectator sport, or, you could do something like that and also chatting about it, was very interesting to me. Also, I was surprised at how much it had become part of our culture, and the notion of a coder was something that people just kind of know about in general, for better and unfortunately more often worse, that, coders were a big part of the current zeitgeist, if you will, in terms of, being not only the internet itself, but being on the internet and being part of, memes and other types of stuff, and actually being not only consumers of social media, but big producers of it as well. So, so that's where I ended up doing this, is I realized I kind of missed programming, because possibly use an extra revenue source down the road that, if I get a few dollars here and there for some YouTube advertising bucks, then that would be great. But more importantly, just exercising the muscle about teaching, which is why I went to the academics mainly. And it was one of those things where certainly I didn't do enough research and enough papers to really kind of get in there, as I was much more interested in the teaching and mentoring part of it. So that's where I am. And where going in the future, I don't know. I might start trying to contribute to some open source projects in Racket itself when I get some time. But certainly it's one of those things where the great thing about content creation is that the way I make it is very not time intensive. And that means I can just take an hour when I have enough energy to come up with a video and put it out and just see what sticks. So if you have any questions or suggestions about things you'd like to see in future videos, leave a comment. Anyway, again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.